Troubles with binocular rivalry. Yes, binocular rivalry can allow us to control for stimulus confounds, but there are other confounds to worry about. Sometimes these other confounds are more important. Turns out, if we ask people to do a task based on the stimuli, let's say to detect a small rotation of the red stimulus, perhaps unsurprisingly, when one sees the red stimulus, one is more able to detect this rotation. When one sees the blue stimulus instead, not surprisingly, they are not very good at detecting the rotation of the red stimulus. That is, we are not so good at detecting things we don't consciously see, even if they are presented to one of our eyes. We can call this a task performance capacity confound. That is, when the subjective percept changes, our ability to perform tasks regarding the stimuli changes too. So, when they think that in binocular rivalry, the switch was just about the subjective percept, that doesn't seem quite right. This is closely related to the signal strength confound we mentioned earlier. The concept of signal strength can be a bit vague. If we are talking about the strength of a neural signal, we can measure that, using an fMRI, for example. But if we are talking about the signal strength of the representation at a cognitive level, how do we measure that? One way may be to treat task performance capacity as a kind of proxy for signal strength. That is, when we say a representation is strong, presumably people are able to do tasks well with that representation. So the two kinds of confounds of task performance capacity and signal strength are highly related. Turns out binocular rivalry can happen to unconscious stimuli too. That is, if we render the stimuli unconscious with masking, the brain signals for the images presented to the left versus right eyes will rival and fluctuate just as if the stimuli were consciously seen too. That is, the unconscious signal for an image will dominate for a few seconds and get suppressed by the signal for the other image from the other eye for a few seconds, just as what you would expect in normal conscious binocular rivalry. So what really rivals in binocular rivalry is not necessarily the subjective percept per se. It looks very much like it may be just a matter of changes in the signal strengths of the two competing representations, regardless of whether they are conscious or unconscious. If you think about this, of course, these confounds are there in the masking case as well. The unmasked target is much easier to discriminate and is presumably associated with a stronger representation. From here, you may start to see that the confounds of signal strength and task performance capacity are actually really nasty to deal with. When we consciously see something, we tend to be able to do tasks about the stimulus better, and this applies to many other experimental paradigms too. Earlier, we said that having confounds is not necessarily so bad. It depends a bit on how they may change our results. But here's the problem. If in looking for the NCC, we are almost always comparing just a big perceptual signal, allowing us to do tasks very well, versus a tiny signal that we can't do much with, well then, of course, these confounds will systematically contaminate what we find. Almost trivially, we will be seeing that the NCC is just some patterns of brain activity that are more stable, complex, able to reach further in the processing hierarchy, etc. But these may just reflect superior signal strength or task performance capacity, rather than subjective experience per se. This is one of the most crucial points in understanding experiments on consciousness, and is not at all an easy or straightforward issue, so take your time. You may need to watch the last few sections again and slowly think them through. Also, we will revisit this in the next few classes again too, so no worries, eventually we'll get there. Importantly, we will introduce some methods for dealing with these confounds too. But for now, we should have some idea of why we won't be talking much further about binocular rivalry, even though it is popular. It may not really be quite as promising as it first seems.